Alright, so do you want to introduce yourself or do you want me to introduce you?
Either way is fine.
Okay, well, I'm here with the Professor Tim Lisko. He's the photography professor of Franklin College. So I'm going to ask you three questions. So I might as well start off with, what is art?
Well, to begin with, it seems like something that people fight about, kind of in a sweeping academic sense, that people always wonder what it is and then argue about what it is, what it isn't. And the best answer that I've figured out to tell my students is that art is kind of a successful aesthetic communication where the intended audience gets out of some kind of piece of work the concept or feeling or emotion or whatever that the artist intended to put into it. Other than some sort of artistic expression that is somehow beyond what it takes day to day to live.
What isn't art?
I've got no idea. This is one of the things that I think about a lot, actually, is that art seems to depend a lot on perspective. So that to a particular audience, something might be art that isn't to somebody else. And the standards vary depending on sort of who's doing the assessment. So with art academics and people who figured largely, I guess, in the art industry, so curators and gallery owners and that kind of thing, there seems to be a general assessment of art as something that's slightly challenging and out of the ordinary, maybe, where things that are presented in their entirety in a way where they're too simple and where the question is answered too readily, I guess that kind of thing tends to not be considered art. So there's some kind of element of surprise that might be equal to creativity. I don't know. The best way I can look at it, I guess, is to say that art isn't something that takes no effort and then doesn't seem to take any effort. That doesn't ask any questions and then doesn't seem to ask any questions. I don't know. It's a hard one to answer.
What is your criteria for evaluating whether something is art or not?
Well, I've got to say that I try in classes never to call something art or not. And I've tried to set all the classes up so that they essentially do this. They say these standards or techniques or approaches are ones that are more likely to get something to be recognized as art or to be almost qualified to be called art, so that these things will get you to the door, right? So in photography, everything I talk about is the intentional use of the camera controls, intentional use of the composition, intentional use of the color correction and all of that. So that if you use all of those things in a way that seems consistent, that drives your meaning forward, it's more likely to be considered art. But that doesn't mean that if you do everything right, everybody will say, look, that's art, because there's no way to determine that.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of luck to what goes in the art market or what's successful in the art market. There's a little bit of reading the trends and seeing what's successful at a particular time. So I don't think it's useful in my classes to say art or not. So that's why I'll say, does this look like the composition is balanced? Right? Because balanced composition is more likely to be considered art. But you could have things in museums that are counterpoints to that. It's that little bit of popularity contest in art that confuses me. Like, I keep thinking, I want to say Bertinsky, it's not him, but the photographer, I'm completely blank on his name, recently sold the most expensive photo ever, and it was $7 million. He just takes scenes from the real world and then multiplies the repetition or multiplies the lack of interest in it, so that what you end up with is this panoramic photo that's got nothing in it on purpose. And there are people who would look at it and say that's absolutely not art. And then there's people who would spend $7 million for a print that you could reproduce by hitting a button. And so I think having that argument in the context of the class doesn't serve me as well as to say, look, here's this guy whose work somebody says is art, somebody says it isn't. People have arguments about its merit, but the things that make it eligible for that argument are this, this, and this. You know, these are the things that get it taken seriously to begin with. So him talking about his work in a particular way, where he explains what he's done visually in some sort of art historical context, makes it eligible. You know, him making the camera controls look intentional makes it eligible. Him making the composition intentional makes it eligible. So that's the best answer I can give, is that, I don't want to call something art or not. You know?
Oh yeah, because I mean, I also find it's challenging because like I know like when I was taking painting 1 and 2, it was like we had to fill out these charts of hours and all that, and I realized like slowly, you can spend like 20 hours on a painting that may not necessarily be considered art because it might not look compositionally balanced, or it might look like crappy. It's like, I mean, I could spend 20 hours on just painting something that it may not look aesthetically pleasing. Like that masking tape painting, if I didn't bother with the masking tape, I could spend 20 hours on just doing whatever I was doing before I decided to do that, and then it might not have been as successful as if I started doing the tape.
Right.
It's like it's a balance between like how many hours you spend into something and what comes from like the conceptual idea of what you want to put on that canvas. So like, that's why usually when I look at my own work, I don't really consider it art or anything. I just consider it just stepping stones, because that's all you're trying to do when you're in college, is trying to get your foot in the door and just trying to get something to start from, then leap into something else. And
right.
It's almost like a snowball effect. You start small, then you slowly get bigger, and faster you go.
Well, and it's almost for me like, and kind of going off of what you said, is that it seems like, well, not seems like, I am very reluctant to say whether something is art, but what I really like to do is assess whether the person who made the artwork, whether their intentions were met. So if your intention, let's say, is to make something abstract that seems like it has a really kind of excuse me, really kind of wild hand to it. So it's finished and worked, but not precise, right? If that's your intent, and if that backs up the meaning behind the work, I'm likely to say, and if it's well received, I'm likely to say that it was successful. If your intention is to render something photorealistic, and then it comes out abstract, and people look at it to see that it's well rendered and it's not, then it's unsuccessful. And I think that judgment is a lot easier to make, and it's a lot more clear to people, just to say whether you've achieved what you set out to achieve. Right. And sometimes you'll accidentally do things, like with your tape. Excuse me. You do something with your tape where you might have set out to do one thing, and midway through you took a detour and then did something else and ended up with something that turns out to be successful. But then you sort of have this new intent, and then when you show it to people, you want them to think a particular thing. So if they think, wow, this is beautiful as far as forms and shapes and textures, and I love this, then you're successful. If they look at it and think, this is not the assignment, then it's unsuccessful. If they think, I could have done this, and they're not your audience, it could still be successful. But if they think, I could have done this, there's nothing to it, and they are your intended audience, then it's unsuccessful. Does that make sense? It's almost like it's the intent plus the intended audience. So that if you're shooting for gallery owners and you're not getting them, it's easy to say that it's unsuccessful. if you're shooting for gallery owners and you don't impress my mom, then you could still be successful, whether she likes it or not.
Yeah.
So it just all depends on that context between the art and the audience and the artist.
Well, that was a really great discussion. That was a great way to end it, I guess. So, thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
All that good stuff. So,
You know I like to talk.